What I thought I'd do is I talk a little bit about, a lot of people just want to know about the title and then go home. So I talk a little bit about the title and where the idea for the book came from, and then I will read a short passage from it. And I think as a reporter, I'm always kind of amazed by how often inspiration comes from passing remarks that people make, and that's where the generation of a lot of news stories comes from. And this book was not that different, because I was on vacation from Egypt. I was in San Francisco at a dinner party, and a woman who was sitting next to me said, "I have a question about the Middle East." And usually when people say, "I have a question about the Middle East," it's when is there going to be peace? And I was expecting that question, but she said, "Aren't there any normal people in the Middle East? Or at least people like you or me, or people we could relate to?" And I thought, well, there are all kinds. And it made me think that I had just sort of written too much about violence, and that I needed to go back and revisit the area and give people an appreciation for the kind of people I spent time with. And also to try and sort of dispel some of some of the stereotypes that people have about the region in terms of topics about things like fatwas and jihad and issues like that. I think that just a lot of people are interested in how news is put together. And so when it came time, I've been working on it for a year or so, and it came time to give it a title. And I wanted to get across the idea that it wasn't really a policy tone, but that serious issues are discussed. And it wasn't really working very well. I wasn't coming up with anything inspired. And so I had a title party. And I invited 20 of my smartest friends over. You were invited, and you're in the room, it just means you weren't there. And you were in San Francisco at the time I had a party. And so I fed them a lot of red wine, and then we put big sheets of paper on the wall, and people just shouted out titles. And we came up with all kinds of earnest titles. All the words in the subtitle, Unexpected Encounters in the Changing Middle East, came out that night, but not necessarily in that order. But all my favorite titles we couldn't use, the editor rejected them. And they were like, Waiter, There's a Fly in My Hummus, Shake, Rattle, and Rule, Bakshish, The Quest for Change in the Middle East. The one that came out is because I usually forget to tell the crucial part, which is how I did find the title. When you work in Hizbollah controlled territory, which is basically the southern regions of Beirut or South Lebanon, they make you fill out all this paperwork first. They ask you where you went to college, where your parents went to college, and then they ask you what your birthday is. And then on my very next birthday, up popped a message in my email from Hizbollah at Hizbollah.org. And there's a little poem in the book that they sent me on my birthday. So that's where that came from. I thought I'd read a little bit in the spirit, because you said those was a memoir in the Middle East, and since I grew up in Libya, I thought I'd read a little bit of the Libya chapter, and we'll see how we do for time, whether we want to go on and read a little bit more. And the part that I'm reading is I grew up in a town called Brega, and my first assignment back for the New York Times when I was made the bureau chief in Cairo was actually to go to Libya, and I thought this was incredibly serendipitous because I really wanted to go see my childhood home, which I hadn't seen for about 25 years. So I kept trying to get permission to go to Brega, and things kept getting in the way. So I think that's all the explanation. So this is one of the things that stopped me. In theory, the people ran everything. In practice, nothing ran. But the entire country shut down for the popular committees, which unrolled as if a Vermont town hall meeting had been cross-bred with a Soviet bloc association. The brother leader, Gaddafi's preferred title inside Libya, would abruptly suggest an agenda for sessions called at random at least twice a year. They usually involved strictly domestic matters, but occasionally foreign affairs were included when he needed to make some face-saving gesture. Every office, schools, government ministries, airlines, shops, closed for days, sometimes weeks, while the committees met. Truly important decisions, of course, notably anything affecting the oil industry, were left in the hands of accomplished technocrats and never mentioned at any popular committee agenda. I resigned myself to the inevitable, since there was absolutely no chance of getting permission to fly down to Braga while the popular committees were in session, and clearly there would be nothing else to do. So I wandered down Revolution Street from the hotel to the neighborhood session taking place in the Rose movie theater. The lurid posters for a karate action flick were still plastered out front, despite the many banners hailing the enduring importance of the committees. The session provided a far better window on the feelings of an average Libyan than I could have imagined, proving the accuracy of the advice told to reporters all over the world: go to everything. It was my first experience to a phenomenon I subsequently saw again and again. Sorry, it's my first exposure, anyway. One that proved the hardest to convey to newspaper readers fed a steady diet of appalling violence from the region. The Libyan meetings indicated that ordinary Arabs are well aware that their nations are out of step with the rest of the world, that they are fed up with both the incompetence of their rulers and the unpredictable quality of their lives. They crave normalcy, but despair at not knowing how to attain it in the face of oppression that brings at least jail terms and even death to anyone trying to organize dissenters. One of the great failures of American diplomacy in the Middle East has been Washington's inability to harness that frustration. The popular committee meetings indicated just how discouraged Libyans were about their lot. Life in Libya was so unpredictable that people weren't even sure what year it was. The year of my visit was officially 1369, but just 2 years earlier, Libyans had been living through 1429. No one could quite name for me the day when the count changed, especially since both remained in play. A newspaper headline when I arrived, for example, heralded changes in a legal bulletin, number 4, for 1431, while the paper itself was dated with the current year, 1369. Confused? So was I. The date is but one example of the brother leaders' fickle decisions, switching suddenly from the standard Muslim calendar to one marking the year since the Prophet Muhammad's birth, and then shifting to one counting from his death. The rest of the 1.3 billion or so Muslims around the world happily use a calendar that starts from the date that Muhammad migrated from Mecca to Medina to found the faith. Gaddafi had also decided some years earlier that he disliked the names of both the Western and the Eastern months, so he invented his own names. February is called Lights, August is Hannibal. Organizers threw up their hands and put the Western year in parentheses somewhere in their announcements.